So thank you very much for joining this BIAA event. I'm the Assistant Director of the Institute, Leonidas Karakatsanis, and like first of all to thank you all for being here and thank our speakers today, Professor Neophytos Loizides and Associate Professor Esra Çuhadar for accepting this invitation. And of course the BIAA staff that makes it so easy to organize these things here. It is as if we're just having really a lunchtime discussion. So let me present the speakers and say a few things about the rationale of the event, and then we'll move on with the presentations. So Dr. Esra Çuhadar is an associate professor at Bilkent University and a senior fellow at the Inclusive Peace and Transition Initiative at the Graduate Institute in Geneva. Dr. Çuhadar's research interests include conflict resolution and political psychology, and her research has been published in many highly esteemed academic journals, such as Political Psychology, Negotiation and Conflict Management Research, International Negotiation, Journal of Peace Research, and many more, coupled by several contributions on significant edited volumes on conflict resolution. Dr. Çuhadar received one of the Young Scientist Awards, Baget, by the Science Academy in Turkey, as well as grants from USIP, Sabancı University, TÜBİTAK, and the German Marshall Fund. Besides her academic research, she has conducted numerous trainings and consultations in negotiation and mediation processes in Turkey and elsewhere, and as part of this, she has been working as a regional mediator for the World Bank in Turkey and the Caucasus since 2011, and has served as a board member of the European Mediation Network Initiative. Professor Neophytos Loizides, on the other hand, from the University of Kent, in the UK, is a prolific writer of important recent works in the field. He's the author of The Politics of Majority Nationalism, Framing Peace, Stalemates and Crisis, that was published by Stanford University Press in 2015. Designing Peace, Cyprus and Institutional Innovations in Divided Societies, published by the University of Pennsylvania Press last year, 2016, while he's also the co-editor of Settlers in Contested Lands, Territorial Disputes and Ethnic Conflicts, and has authored more than 30 academic articles and book chapters in the areas of nationalism, forced displacement, and conflict regulation in deeply divided societies. After the talk, you can browse those books there at the entrance of the room. So Professor Loizides has also served as a consultant to various governments and international organizations, including the Council of Europe, and regularly contributes commentaries to international media such as The Guardian, The Washington Post, and The Wall Street Journal. We're really happy to have you both here with us today. Really few things, quick things about the rationale of the event. First of all, about the date. Why talk about the effects of referendum before one very significant one? Three reasons. The first is the opportunity to have both esteemed colleagues together here, because Neophytos had a short visit this week, so it was like a perfect match. Second, as you all know, because probably you're here because you're interested in the subject, this has been a week that a significant blockage has been overcome in the Cyprus negotiations. So we are kind of back on track, and we can talk here with a hypothesis of a solution going to a referendum in Cyprus. Maybe it's maybe a long way, but we can discuss with this idea in mind. And third, since we are talking about the effects of referenda in across regions, I think it's an important moment to grasp a bit this heat of the moment before one of the very important referendums in the area. So good food for thought and good food for the discussion. So, just a brief idea about the context. We are exactly 13 years after the referenda in Cyprus over the Annan Plan, 24th of April 2004. Meanwhile, all the engaged actors, Greece, UK and Turkey, have been involved or are getting involved in today's in significant referenda. The bailout referendum in Greece, Brexit referendum in the UK, and the forthcoming presidential system referendum here. Third, At the other end of the world, we have recently seen a successful peace process being accomplished following a failed referendum, which is the Colombian case, which it's a very interesting case to take into account in this processes. So already few questions that are floating around. One, how does this context of like aggravated referenda dynamics affect each other and the possibility of both the possibility of a solution in Cyprus, then the current negotiation in Cyprus, and the prospect of a referendum there. And what can we learn of these aggregating processes to predict, plan, or help in the process of the Cyprus referendum? So there will be a series of points offered by the speakers, and then we will have plenty of time for discussion with everybody. So,
I get to start.
Yes.
Okay. Well, hello everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for coming to this talk, and thank you very much for Leonidas and the whole institute here for inviting us and organizing this event. I am actually not an expert on Cyprus per se, and I'm also not an expert on referenda per se. So let me tell you why I'm here first, okay? What I do. I actually, most of my research is on mediation and negotiation processes, and from a more political psychology perspective. And a couple of years ago, about three years ago, I started working on a research project looking into the effects of broadening participation in peace negotiations. So in other words, the question we asked was, what happens if we conduct negotiation processes in a more participatory, inclusive way, okay? Does this affect, for example, the quality of peace agreements signed? Does this affect the sustainability of peace agreements, etc.? So this is the original question that I was interested in. So when we started together with a colleague in Geneva, when we started this research project, which was funded by 4 governments, Switzerland, Norway, Finland, and Turkey. We identified actually about 7 different mechanisms of inclusion that are used in negotiation processes around the world. So first we identified these mechanisms. And then, as a result of a comparative research project, comparative case study, where we looked at 40 different negotiation processes from around the world, and we examined in detail how these inclusion mechanisms or inclusion modalities, we called it in research, were used. When did they work? How did they work? Who was included? Who was excluded? Which actually modality was used more frequently, etc. So we were more interested in the who and how aspects of inclusion. So one of the findings was, Cyprus was one of our cases, and I wrote the case study on Cyprus, and we particularly looked at the referendum process in 2004, the negotiations leading up to the 2004 referendum in Cyprus. And we also, out of these 7 mechanisms, one of these 7 mechanisms that we examined, inclusion mechanisms, was referendums. Okay, so let me tell you maybe first to begin with what were these inclusion mechanisms that we identified. The first one we identified was direct representation of parties at the table. So this was usually, most of the cases we found in this regard were cases of national dialogues, which is another concept that is becoming very popular these days. And our national dialogue report is coming out. If you're interested in, I would be happy to share it with you. National dialogues are these, sort of all-inclusive, multi-stakeholder negotiation processes where there is a wide representation from all parts of the society, and these are usually held in times of political crises, when that country is in need of a new social contract or in need of a new constitution, etc. So they are very much associated, closely associated with regime crises. So examples of this was in Yemen, for example. There was a national dialogue process following the uprisings, the protests there. There was another one held in Egypt, for example, etc. The second type of modality inclusion mechanism we identified was observer status, granting parties observer status. And there are few cases of this, few examples of this, but sometimes this is given to women's groups, like in Liberia. Sometimes this status is given to media, especially in national dialogues when they want to broadcast these dialogues, talks to the wider population. The third mechanism was consultations, and all sorts of consultations. Sometimes we saw these consultations in the form of official consultative forums, like parallel forums. So these forums were established as in parallel to official talks, official negotiations. And so in the parallel consultative forum, there's civil society and broader involvement of all parties, and then somehow this forum is linked to the official talks, and then the input goes into the official talks. This was the case in Afghanistan, for example, in bond negotiations. In Guatemala, there was a similar process. Another type of consultations were like public consultations, like town hall meetings, or different consultations with wider groups of people to get input from them about what they think about what is discussed at the peace talks. A very famous example of this is the Wise People Commission in Turkey that was used here. There was a similar process in Colombia, for instance. And out of these two, in addition to these two consultative mechanisms, sometimes the negotiating parties, they don't want to establish these official consultative forums, etc., and they want to keep it informal, or they don't want any inclusion or consultation at all. In those cases, we observed that the mediator serves a very crucial role in conducting these consultations with different societal actors. And an example of this was what Kofi Annan did in Kenya, for instance, when he was the UN mediator to mediate the post-election violence talks in Kenya. The fourth type of mechanism we identified was inclusive commissions. And these commissions were set up for different purposes. Sometimes a commission was set up to conduct the negotiations, and these were all-inclusive commissions. Sometimes a commission was set up as a permanent body after, to be functional at the post-agreement implementation phase, etc. The fifth mechanism we identified was the high-level problem-solving workshops, or high-level track to dialogue, where that gathers actually people very close to the decision makers, but these are confidential talks away from the public, etc. But it still has the aim of broadening participation and to gain public support. So the sixth one we identified was referenda, which is actually one method of including everyone in a way, allowing everyone to participate in the process, or allowing everyone to have a say in the outcome. And finally, we also identified mass action as one way of actually participation, which is very different from the first six. But still, we saw that in a lot of cases it served a very crucial role, just like in Cyprus actually before 2004. These mass rallies, especially in the Turkish Cypriot community, and these peace rallies, etc. That's also one type of participation, even though it's not institutionalized, structured, etc. So that's how I actually came into studying referendum. And what is interesting is that so what I would like to share with you today derives mostly from related to Cyprus, derives mostly from this comparative perspective that I have from this study of other peace processes, negotiation processes. Okay, so having said this, let me start posing a number of questions and how this work and how I relate this work that we did, this comparative work, to what is going on in Cyprus and what is going on with referenda. When I heard about the breakdown of negotiations in Cyprus over this enosis, issue, it immediately, it was this political psychologist in me immediately said that, look, this is a typical intractable conflict. Once again, Cyprus has proved itself to be intractable, to be an intractable, protracted conflict, because what happens is that regardless of all these lengthy technical work and negotiations and different working groups and this and that, at some point in the process, there's this collective memory and traumas from the past that come and haunt the whole process and it gets stuck, which happened in a lot of other places in the world. So thinking about that, and I know everybody is asking. So, are the parties close to a deal? Are the parties close to a deal today? I actually don't know. Okay, but what I'm interested in is a different question when it comes to Cyprus, and that is. We probably, looking at all these cases around the world, we also know from other statistical studies that about between 40 and 50% of peace agreements that are signed fail within 5 years. Okay, so and in Cyprus again today too, we're too much fixated on the agreement, right, and the agreement as an outcome. And in fact, if you look at these statistics, right, the agreement itself is just a little, small thing within this huge, within this overall process. So we need to probably change our thinking about this, and we need to be asking whether actually Cyprus, even if there is an agreement today, is going to be one of these 50%, is going to be among this 50% failed agreements, or is it going to be, can it turn into a sustainable peace agreement that is implemented successfully? Okay, so changing our thinking this way, then we need to be thinking about, all right, so what do we need to be thinking about, and what do we need to be thinking about for the process, for the negotiation process at the moment, so that it's not a stillborn baby. Yeah. Okay. So what are these? So what are these? And all these questions that I would like to raise, and then I'll try to answer them, are related to this. First of all, the first question is: are the negotiations connected to the realities on the ground? Right. Thinking in terms of, things have changed a lot since 2002, 2004. The regional dynamics have changed. The international dynamics have changed. We might have new veto players. We might have new spoilers. We might actually, the socioeconomic situation has changed, right? So the overall context has significantly changed from the past round of negotiations. And so the current negotiations, are they in sync with all these changes, all these contextual changes on the ground? That's one thing. The second one is, is there, which is highly relevant to the research that I mentioned, The first, all of us are still, very much bogged with this failed referendum in 2004, right? So, is referendum a good method to engage the public support in Cyprus? And can we bear, thinking about this, can we bear another failed referendum in Cyprus, right? So if referendum is a good method, if not, or in addition to a referendum, what would be other ways to achieve public buy-in or public support? Okay, because we all know that without, in all of these cases that we studied, we know that without public support, you cannot get a peace agreement. You can actually sign an agreement between two leaders and perhaps even ratify it, but you cannot implement an agreement without public support, right? So let's. That's the second question that I would like to discuss. All right. So let me then start with this public support issue. Then, where do we stand on it in Cyprus today? Overall, when we look at peace negotiations, we can say that there are two reasons why peace agreements fail the public support, or they fail to gather public support. One of them is usually there is a lack of support by important political elites and their supporters in that place. And second reason is that there is a lack of awareness or ownership of the process by the voters. Okay, so let's look at Cyprus and where Cyprus stands in terms of these two. Do we see? I'll try to actually compare the current situation to the previous process in this sense. Do we see an improvement? Do we see a progress in that sense? Both of these problems, both the lack of support by important political elites and lack of awareness and ownership of the process were definitely problems for the 2004 referendum. And although the situation has improved slightly today, I still see them as problems today in the Cyprus negotiations. So we still see them, even though I think to a less degree compared to the previous rounds of negotiations. And what are some of the implications? What do I mean by this? One of the major factors that cause peace agreements fail at the implementation stage is that there may be some political power holders in the society that do not want a peace agreement, that do not want a solution, but they cannot garner enough support to stop the negotiations or to fail the negotiations. So they actually focus more on the implementation phase, okay, to basically derail the implementation of the agreement. So this is a very common phenomenon. Let me just give you a simple an example of it. A very typical example of it happened in Guatemala, for instance. Okay, Guatemala, the peace agreement that ended the long civil war in Guatemala was a super inclusive, very inclusive peace negotiation process. There was this civil society involvement, and all opposition parties, everybody was involved in an official parallel consultative forum, and all this input from this forum went into the peace agreement. Okay, so the agreement was a very good agreement, touching the root causes of the conflict and all that. However, what happened is, once the peace agreement was done, most of the constitutional changes that were required for the implementation of the peace agreement had to be put to a referendum. And these were, and there was this sort of economic elite within Guatemala, and they were very well organized at the same time. They opposed negotiations, and they also succeeded in generating enough public opposition to the implementation of the agreement. So it failed at the referendum. Okay, not all of it. Partially it was implemented, but especially the part of the agreement that dealt with the root cause of the conflict, which was the distribution of land and which was related to land ownership, etc., which was the essence of why there was a civil war in Guatemala. Okay, so referendum was not a good was not a good mechanism then in Guatemala. It sort of gave the advantage to this very powerful economic elite to stop the implementation of a peace agreement. Okay, political. The one problem. First, talking about the lack of support by important political elites. I think what I see in Cyprus is that political elites still compete among themselves, and they place themselves in opposition on opposite grounds when it comes to the negotiation process, both on the Turkish side and the Greek Cypriot side. Okay, this is very much different from a situation from the negotiation process in Northern Ireland, for instance, right? Or in Ireland, let's say, not Northern Ireland, in Ireland. So before the negotiations start, both the governing the governing party and the opposition parties in Ireland decided to make this a national policy. They left it out of political competition, so whoever was elected in Ireland was supportive of the peace process. Okay, there was a tacit agreement or an agreement between the two. Now, this did not happen in Colombia, and I think that was one of the main reasons why the Colombian referendum has failed. It continued in Colombia. The peace agreement continued to be a very competitive sort of political struggle between the governing party and the opposition. So when I think pretty much this case is still like this in Cyprus as well. So I think this is a negative to start with. So even though there is a referendum, then we'll probably see a very similar dynamic to what we've seen in Colombia, right? Political parties taking their positions contrary to one another, and then we see their constituencies, respective constituencies, following what they tell them to do. Okay. So when a peace process is very closely tied to politics, it usually doesn't work. We might also talk about some other institutions like churches, etc., that may also try to block an agreement, even though they cannot affect the negotiation process much. They will be more effective for the referendum campaign and in the aftermath of the referendum for an agreement. The second issue, the lack of awareness, ownership of the process by voters. So this was a huge problem with the Annan plan, right? Leo told me this morning that it was 10,000 page agreement, okay? And by the time the agreement was done and it was put to a referendum, there was very little time. So it was impossible for a person to really try to understand what this agreement was about and how it was going to affect their lives. And from social psychology, we know that people don't like uncertainty, right? They always prefer the certain status quo, even though they're not happy about it, to an unknown, uncertain future. Okay, so that was a major problem with the Annan plan. Okay, so then I talked a lot, and I think
another 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Yeah. All right. So let me just say this and finish it about referenda. So what can be done to increase public support in Cyprus? If there is no public support, or if there are problems with public support, these problems, what can we do? What can be done to build public support? because, as I said, we know that even if the negotiations between the parties conclude an agreement without public support, this is not going to work. First of all, I think we need to be thinking a little bit outside of the box here. And one of the things that should be done, I think, is other than the referendum, or we shouldn't be just thinking about the referendum as a participation mechanism. Yeah, that will happen at some point in the end, but we need to be also thinking about what else can be done in along the path until the referendum, to increase public participation and to increase public buy-in, to increase public support for the negotiations. And because a setback from a failed referendum is more detrimental for a peace process than any other setback, such as a breakup of a ceasefire, etc., which usually doesn't affect it that badly. Okay. So then what I suggest is that there should be probably other mechanisms like forums and especially consultations, different consultative bodies with various societal groups, especially those that are skeptical of a peace agreement. To get their input, to hear their voices, and to basically talk with them about what this peace process is bringing, what this agreement is bringing. In Colombia, the key constituency in this sense was the victims' families, for example. Okay, in Cyprus, there are different groups that are important in this sense. The settlers is one, for example, thinking about it in the on the Turkish Cypriot side, Greek Cypriot side, victims' families, etc. So these consultative mechanisms should be used more effectively to bring in these groups that are likely to oppose the process, and then the negotiators need to really understand why they're opposing it. What is the fear? What are they afraid of? What is it there? Okay, and so town hall meetings, etc. These public consultations could be used more effectively. I know there are, compared to the previous rounds of negotiations, there are more efforts in this time. The UNDP has started, some projects try to make negotiations in Cyprus more inclusive, but a lot of the UNDP activities are still very much limited to people who already have a relationship with someone from the other community. They're already supportive of the peace process. These more hardliner groups are very much left out of these inclusive mechanisms. So that's one thing. The other thing I think is that looking at what especially UNDP has done, they conducted some consultations, like high-level consultations were conducted in Malta in 2013 with Cypriot civic, business, and political figures, etc. There are projects, initiatives to include political parties, civil society, etc. And they, I know Mr. Ada also met with different groups. He even suggested that a multi-stakeholder dialogue is necessary in Cyprus, etc. So it seems like there is some awareness, there is some initiative, but it's still not there. It's not realized fully. Okay, so I think that's necessary. Right. So I think a referendum at the end should be supported, complemented by these additional sort of forums, additional processes, mechanisms to prepare the groundwork for a referendum. And this was not effectively done in Colombia, and as I said, this was also not done in Guatemala, but I think it should be done in Cyprus if we don't want another failed referendum. I'll end it here, and I would be happy to answer questions.
Yes. So, please.
Thank you very much, Leonida, and the Institute for hosting this very important event. My talk will focus on some of the issues that Esra has already mentioned, and I share the comparative perspective in the study of referendums. I also think that it's fundamental to look at what is happening in other parts of the world and try to see experiences that can inform our own understanding of peace processes. At the same time, the number of referendums has been growing around the world. My colleague Mark Wardrop estimates that we had about 10 every decade in the 70s and 60s, about 50 in the past decade. So it's a political phenomenon that is going to be increasing, possibly increasing at the time that everybody is making an observation that we have the rise of globally liberal populism. So the combination of voters choosing the wrong options and the wrong politicians, plus having more direct democracy, might not be necessarily a good thing. So can we think of alternatives? Can we think of ways of structuring referendums? And this is not necessarily an issue only for countries themselves, it's also a matter for international organizations. For instance, we're currently working at the University of Kent with the Organization of American States. We're very much interested in monitoring international referendums in different countries. And the referendums, the first observation we had, which is relevant to the way Leo structure the panel, is that referendums are different to elections. So we need to come up with new ways of thinking about those. But at the same time, different kinds of referendums are different to each other. So the Brexit referendum is about whether the country will be continue to be part of the world. It has already ignited some ethnopolitical issues in the meantime, but it's a referendum about the European Union. The Turkish referendum is a constitutional one, the Greek one is about a bailout, Cyprus one is a peace referendum, so a different category of referendums. Again, what do they have in common? They are very different, but also they have a number of commonalities. Referendums can be quite polarizing. Our experience in the UK has not been very positive. I always say to my colleagues around the world that if the United Kingdom couldn't run properly a referendum and cause so much polarization within the United Kingdom, probably is not a very good idea for other parts of the world. Political culture in the UK was something that attracted me to live in the country, because I always admire the way politics have been dealt with in the UK, but not in the referendum, which has been quite polarizing. It's also very important to see which countries do not have referendums and why. So you have situations of places like Switzerland who have been practicing referendums on many issues. Countries who also practice referendums on important issues, but also less important issues. So their public has developed a long experience dealing with referendums. But neighboring Germany doesn't have a nationwide referendum, and the reason is because they go back to their history and they look at the abuse of plebiscites by Hitler, and they want to have avoid that. Similarly, Belgium is another consociational democracy in Europe. They have their own experience, almost fell apart in the 1950s when they voted on the monarchy. I would suspect that in the UK it will take some time to reintroduce referendum questions as well. United States, you have states like just California, which referendums are quite popular, but you never had a referendum nationwide in the United States. In fact, when the Federalists, there's a very interesting story there, when the Federalists were debating on the American Constitution, for those who are interested to read the Federalist Papers and their communications with others at that particular time, they wanted to create a democracy that is very different to the ancient Greek democracies. They were very educated people. They had the time to study because others were working for them. They could read the ancient texts. They could write letters to people like Adamantios Korais, the Greek Enlightenment figure who was from a city very close to here, from Izmir. And they would communicate and trying to figure out what went wrong in ancient Greece and why we can avoid the direct democracy where the masses have more say than they should. So there's a long debate. This is not a new debate. This is a debate that has been going at least since the beginning of modern democracies. How did the ancient Greeks fail and what we can learn from it. So there's different waves of referendums, and countries have debated whether those are a good way of dealing with difficult problems, particularly countries who have not had referendums before, such as the countries we're talking about, but then you introduce a novel institutional design that might not fit into their political culture. So when it comes to the specifics of Cyprus, we're looking at a special category, the referendums on peace processes, which themselves might have different divisions as a subcategory, depending on how you define peace processes. Often peace processes might be in the form of constitutional arrangements, constitutional transitions that might affect minority groups. In other cases, it might be an international agreement, so that might differ as well. So essentially, and drawing from Esra's very insightful comparative analysis, we have four categories, four possibilities. You can have a successful peace or a relatively successful peace process. You can never have a fully successful peace process, that's in the range of imagination, but a relatively stable peace process with a referendum, and the referendum might play a huge role in legitimizing the peace process. Cases like that might be in Northern Ireland, might be South Africa, the only white referendum, that was restricted only to whites. These cases also show how referendums can be different, because in Northern Ireland it was after they negotiated the agreement. In South Africa it was before, it was a pre-negotiation referendum. De Klerk was challenged by his opponents at the time that he released Nelson Mandela. They argued that he doesn't have the mandate to negotiate the end of apartheid. He took the challenge. He ran a referendum campaign and he got the mandate to finalize the peace process at the pre-negotiation referendum within his community. While in Northern Ireland we had a referendum where all the Northern Irish people, also the people in the Republic, voted at the same time as well, but as two different demos. You have cases where you can have, and there might be a small disagreement, you might want to correct me if I'm wrong, but you might have successful peace processes without a referendum. Mm-hmm. And there I could argue that Dayton is one of them, where parties felt that it wouldn't go through public vote. There was so much war, people were there was an extraordinary situation where people were being killed. 6 months before the Dayton Agreement, Karadzic took a similar plan to a referendum, and at the time people of Republika Srpska voted with 90% against the arrangement. So they felt that this would not be successful. We collected data in 2013, and we found that the pluralities in all three communities would have actually voted today for Dayton if they had an opportunity. And the support among the Serbs was the highest in all communities, much higher than any other community. So there is a reversal as part of Dayton working quite well compared to what others were expecting at the time. You can think of Camp David between Israelis and Palestinians. There was no referendum, yet the two countries got together. Another recent example is the Aceh peace process in Indonesia. We discussed that in a conference that my colleague Betul Çelik organized in Istanbul a few months ago, when we asked the negotiators, why didn't you have a referendum? And the response there was that Indonesia thought that the referendum would be a bad idea, the government of Indonesia, because they had East Timor before that, and they associate referendums with autonomy. So they didn't want to have one in the Aceh province based on their experience in East Timor that led to a lot of violence afterwards. You can have a referendum, that's a third possibility, which can be successful. People might vote for a constitutional transition, but then you can get a civil war, like in Iraq. And of course there was a trick. They designed the referendum in such a way that despite overwhelming Sunni objection to the 2005 referendum, it still passed because other communities supported. They had a complicated formula that I describe in my book. I have a table there that has all the cases that are relevant to Cyprus. And then you can have the fourth possibility, is to have an unsuccessful peace process, which did not have a referendum. That's the fourth possibility. And for us, this is relevant for Cyprus. That's one example, is the Zurich agreements in Cyprus in the 1960s, that we didn't have a referendum back then, and people mentioned that as a reason why the peace process, first constitution of Cyprus, the power sharing arrangements in the 1960s failed. Of course, people who are quite knowledgeable in this room will say there were much bigger reasons for the 1960s constitution to fail. It was ambiguous on a number of very important issues, such as the municipalities. It didn't have any peacekeepers. The UN just, the British just left. There was a peacekeeping force to get the communities to calm down a little bit. There was no democratic experience in Cyprus. It was a constitutional arrangement, and quite a strange one, because it had a presidential system. So it favored the dominant personalities of Makarios and Tektash, which very quickly started fighting with each other, two separate electoral roles, no natural coalitions emerging. So it's what we call in political science, Zurich, overdetermined case, which means there's so many reasons, so many wrongs, yeah. So you cannot say it's a referendum, it's because they didn't vote. So I can show you here some of the general data. These are the cases of stable peace processes which had referendums. This is a stable peace processes with referendums. You can see from here that you have different, the boxes are populated on both sides, and similarly with non-referendums. You have cases from both cases. Some cases can migrate from one and another depending on how you define stable peace processes. We don't have a good definition of that. But the argument I'm trying to make here is that referendums are not necessarily do not necessarily need to be present in order to have a successful process. But in some cases, there might be a necessary evil. In Cyprus, we got, for some reason, which is very strange for me, used to the idea that there should be a referendum. It's now part of the agreement and the conventional wisdom. I think it was early in the negotiations when Vasiliou and Tektash were negotiating. Vasiliou at the 1980s was very liberal and open-minded. He thought people would always vote for him. He would pass the agreement, and Tektash was very pragmatic. And he said, if I can add another reason why people can reject it, I will accept this arrangement. So the Greek Cypriot negotiating team was probably outsmarted by the Turkish Cypriot, by not knowing the international experience on the referendum. But there's no law that says that we have to have a referendum. In fact, there is no constitutional formula on how to turn Cyprus into a federal republic on the Greek Cypriot side. So one of the other issues that I would like to make is that who decides about referendums? With what legal framework? Who has what are the rules of referendums? When we hosted, and that goes back to your original framing of the question, Leo. When we hosted George Papandreou here for the event we organized together, I asked him, I took the opportunity, I said, why didn't you have the referendum immediately when you got elected, once you have the first bailout? You have won if you had it so early in the process, because he was very popular when he got elected. He got elected with a huge margin. He could very easily win the first referendum, and then if he won that referendum, he'd probably never be challenged again. He said there was no law in the Greek system. So the constitution said there should be a law, and they didn't have enough time to pass a law. So a very simple technical detail might have changed Greece history. Greece with Papandreou running the whole course of the bailout very quickly with popular support might have been completely different case. Likewise in the UK, we have all kinds of constitutional challenges on Brexit. which can be transferred to Cyprus very easily. Greek Cypriot lawyers are already studying that very carefully. They're hosting conferences. So even if we win the referendum, there's going to be a constitutional challenge by Greek Cypriots who might oppose that agreement. And they might argue, I suspect, that it will require 2/3 support from the parliament. So you have another complication there. I'm not sure whether this will be convincing in the Constitutional Court, but this is another important issue here. The Annan Plan is a very, very interesting case study, but as I argue about Zurich, I think the Annan Plan shouldn't be a parallel for the future in the study of the peace referendum in Cyprus. It was also overdetermined. I mean, there were so many good reasons why the referendum in the Greek Cypriot side failed. Number one, you don't need a PhD in international diplomacy to have a referendum when the incentive for the Greek Cypriot community was not present anymore. The Greek Cypriot side was already part of the European Union effectively, so that wouldn't have worked. It was a referendum where the leaders didn't agree. There was no consent by the leaders. I mean, it's a fundamental inconsociational theory in power-sharing literature. Leiphart describes it as an elite cartel. So elites come together, they recognize the dangers of not having an agreement, and they come together to negotiate some kind of power sharing, and on the basis of that power sharing, society gets stabilized. It's very strange to have this consociational arrangement without the elites signing up to that, and especially when people face the uncertainty, they will listen to their political leaders. So the leaders were not signing up. And I mean, as a biased Greek Cypriot, I will always say that it included some very harsh provisions for the Greek Cypriot side. I think some harsh provisions were included for the Turkish Cypriot side. But nonetheless, those were very strong reasons why it could fail. So it's very important to look at other cases, not necessarily at the Annan Plan, because of this overdeterminacy of the Annan Plan. Now, Esra raised a very interesting question. What is going to happen if we have a second successful referendum? The Greek Cypriot elites are convinced that that would be a disaster. I don't agree with that. I think nothing will happen. It will be just another stalemate. At some point, you need to take risks in life. It's very in the Western European literature. There is a very strong view that if referendums fail, you need a second referendum, or you have to listen to what people have said. But this is not the case in many countries around the world. People run referendums and run them again, and sometimes they run a referendum, they fail, and they still do their policy. So it is. There's a lot of variation. There's a lot of variation there as what needs to be done. The other issue we facing with the referendums is that they might not necessarily, as a device, they might not necessarily resolve the problem. And one of the first example I mentioned was a possibility of having a legal challenge in both sides of the divide, legal or political challenge. What is the role of the parliament, for instance? The Turkish Cypriots might say something might have similar objections to the referendum. The other question is there is a good likelihood, if one looks at the data, I'm going to come back to this in a second, the two sides are quite close. In our survey, we found a recent survey of whether there is a hypothetical scenario where negotiations lead to a proposed settlement. It appears that on the Greek Cypriot side, the yes and the no this time around will be very close. Okay, this is the first observation. I'll go to the data in more detail in a second. So if this is true, and is shown in many of the surveys, there's a good likelihood that if the no wins with a small margin, and the Turkish Cypriots accept it with a much larger margin, there's a good possibility that the majority of the of the Cyprus public votes yes, but still it doesn't go through because of the Greek Cypriot, of a narrow Greek Cypriot majority. That's one possibility. So what do you do in a situation like that, where the people of Cyprus vote yes, but it doesn't go through because of Greek Cypriot majority? The other thing is that with many of the referendums, and that came across a Colombian case, is that different groups of people might vote in different ways. So one of the surprising findings we found here is that refugees are more likely to vote yes than non-refugees. So you ask about the victims. I mean, so this is, of course, a special category of victims, because the refugees have something to gain, unlike other victims. They have something to gain from the peace settlement. They might get either compensations for their properties or get their properties back. So what is driving this current peace process is the refugees. The refugees feel that they have been waiting to find a solution on their properties. There's a group who are the people who want to be compensated because a lot of time has passed and they have moved on. About 4 out of 10 are people who want to be compensated and move on. And that will make majority ownership on the Turkish Cypriot side very easily. There is the absolute committed returnees, those who return whatever possibility is there for them, usually about 2 to 10. And the rest were between, and they are ready to find a compromising solution. But the refugees are more likely to vote yes. So there is a possibility, which is quite likely to happen, that the plan will be rejected with a narrow majority on the Greek Cypriot side. The people of Cyprus will vote yes, and the majority of those who have bigger stakes, who are refugees, might vote yes on both communities. So when I was presenting, we had a public consultation with this data, and one of the refugees said to us, I have my property there, I have so much to lose, I have so much land, I'm in debt, the bank is going to take my house away. And then I hear people who are not refugees going and having fish in the north, and because they didn't like the coffee they serve them afterwards, they don't want to have a settlement. Is it fair that they will be voting? And this happened in the situation of Colombia. Clearly the regions who defeated FARC, there was no possibility of war, they voted no. The people who didn't have any conflict voted no. And the areas that had a high likelihood of conflict resumption, if I'm not mistaken, voted yes. Those who were more likely to face new conflict voted yes. So is it fair? Is referendum a fair way, given that you have so many constituencies within each group that might have very, very different interests and might be implicated in different ways? Esra also mentioned different kinds of victims. So I would like to share this is post-1974 Greek Cypriot victims. I apologize, I don't have Turkish Cypriot data yet, but we got a new grant right now to replicate this study on the Turkish Cypriot, our Turkish Cypriot team, Turkish Cypriot colleagues. And in addition to that, we're going to be running a similar survey with the Greek Cypriots, and then with the assistance of the British Academy, we're going to be running a survey of the Cypriot diaspora. So I hope Yusuf will complete that questionnaire very soon as part of our proud Cyprus diaspora. So what the Cypriot diaspora wants. But when it comes to the 1974 victims category within the Greek Cypriot community in Cyprus, 14% lost a member of their family during the war. This is their representatives. 21% family member has been missing, 1 out of 5. 1 out of 5, a close family member injured or tortured. And right now, what really surprised us is that we have more than half of the Greek Cypriots have some kind of refugee status. How is this possible? When the people left were forced to leave from the north, these were only 160,000 people, and now the population is something like 1 million. What happened is that there are people who had properties that migrated, the grandparents migrated before, so they have some kind of connection through their grandparents. We look at, this is one of the, see if I can have it here. Yeah, so personally displaced at 19.8. The father became displaced 30.1. The mother became displaced 29.1. Displaced through property So people who had some kind of property or had owned by someone else in the family, 37.7. Displaced through descent, so one of their grandparents was born in the north, 30.1. And people who got married to someone who has been displaced is 20.4. So if you put the different groups together, they make the majority of the Greek Cypriot community in total. So that gives you different categories of refugees who have a stake on the settlement, because if these people, there is a satisfactory arrangement either through compensations or property restitution, then they're more likely to vote yes. And then you're thinking of the other victim groups, missing persons, what kind of arrangements you can have there, people who have been possibly tortured, a different profile in terms of their support for the settlement, and so on and so forth. It's very important to look at the victims, and so far we haven't been able to do so in a systematic way. The question that Esra raised on how to think about this in a more systematic way, this is how the undecided will vote. So we gave two scenarios, two hypothetical scenarios. So we wanted to see the relative impact of properties versus security, because these are very important issues in the negotiations. And the conventional wisdom is that security is more important. So we asked whether replacing Ankaras for EU guarantees will make difference in your vote among the undecided, and whether refugees having the first say on their property will make a difference. And even between the refugees and the non-refugees, the property seem to be more important. So our vote yes for sure is 68.6 when it comes to the properties, and yes for sure is 34.3 when it comes to replacing Ankaras for EU guarantees. So the property issue is more important, but of course that should be taken with some precaution, because when we were collecting the data, there were discussions about the property. So it was a salient issue in the negotiations, while since then there was more discussion on security. It was in March last year that we ran this survey with the support of the Leadership Trust and the University of Cyprus. So we're going to be replicating that in a couple of months, the same question, to see if anything has changed in the meantime in terms of security becoming much more salient in the Greek Cypriot question. But based on these findings, one could argue that there is more flexibility when it comes to properties. Insecurity is usually one side will have to compromise. It's much more difficult to think in innovative terms that both sides will accept. But with properties, there can be a lot of solutions that we haven't even started thinking about. To give you an example, a few months ago, a group of people who are working on Poland, we put a proposal together, a very ambitious one, to interview the entire refugee population and to have individual data for every person who is either a new owner, Turkish Cypriot, or an old owner, and collect from that data their views and trying to get individual packages that meet their first or second or third acceptable preference. So this can be a much bigger area in terms of the property issue, can be a much bigger area if we have the time to improve the quality and inclusivity and participation in terms of the peace process. At a more fundamental level, if a peace process includes referendums at the very end, it's absolutely necessary, as Esra has mentioned, that the entire peace process is designed accordingly. One cannot think the people as the last part of the change. The people are to be included in a referendum, particularly if you're making such an ambitious attempt to convince two communities simultaneously. This is unprecedented. It's very difficult after 4 decades, even more, of division to get two communities simultaneously to agree in an ethnically federal society after such a long time. It will be unprecedented. It will be something like the fall of the Berlin Wall, which is just happening in the Middle East in the midst of terrible wars and global uncertainty and lack of international support in terms of finances, so on and so forth. It will be unprecedented in that sense, and people will read through the lines, and people will require guarantees, and will require incentives, they will require consultation. So the entire peace process will have to be designed accordingly if we need to be successful this time around. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to both speakers. I think the very interesting thing here is that you force us to think both outside the box. So not consider referenda as this kind of sacred moment of democracy, that we can think of them as a part of the process, but at the same time think more properly inside the box. So if we have referenda, they need to be much more organized and much more integral part of a process instead of this moment of revelation that has been so far. So I will just add a few questions which not necessarily to be answered, and then we open the floor to gather more questions. One would be, since if referendum is part of the process and we have so much aggregated experience now, is there an issue with the margin of the vote? Is there an issue with how many people actually vote for a yes or for a no? Because specifically because of what you say, that this becomes such a divisive issue. Mm-hmm. Is it enough to have a 51% mm-hmm. for any kind of these big decisions? And I was wondering whether you know how the democratic theory generally is reacting to the actual facts we get from the ground with all these big yes and no's that are either on the margin, which was the Brexit case, either the big no's that becomes yeses, that's the Greek-like case. So you have all these very different facts from the experience on the ground, so I was wondering what is going on there. The other thing I was thinking of just throwing onto the table, and we can discuss about it, is that what is the case with the actual referendums and their effects on the peace process now? So Brexit, the idea that, does it affect the Brexit? Does the Brexit vote bring an issue about creating problems for framing the Cyprus issue as an EU issue for as long as UK is a significant stakeholder in all this? At the same time, thinking the tensions between Turkey and EU and how the EU issue has become an issue of the campaigning for the presidential referendum. One. Second, for the Greek side, I was really thinking is that was there any effect actually of the Greek referendum to the Cyprus negotiations? And I would just again throw it on the table. I think it kind of consolidated specific dividing lines within the government, and kind of consolidated a role of what the ANEL side, kind of, let's say, the more national side in the Syriza government, by consolidating this no camp as a combination of left-wing and right-wing no. So maybe this has played an issue and a role in the whole process. We can discuss about it. So let's open the floor and take some questions.
Okay. Yes.
Yes. It would be great if you can say your name and your affiliation for our recording. And I hope you're not intimidated if I take a picture of if someone takes the picture while you're okay. Good.
You guys started, Associate Professor. Well, first of all, thank you everybody and for inviting and for the speaker. Actually, my question links very much with Leo's about the utility of referendums. I mean, to have a successful solution, do we really need a referendum? Let's ask that very directly and to the point. And here I would like to question not yourself as analyst, but in terms of the policy makers. Is this the aim, a genuine one, finding a solution, or the aim is bypassing the pressure of making hard decision? So in a sense, they don't want to be the scapegoats. They don't want to make the hard decision so that they bypass this to the people, which making the decisions for better and for worse in political science, we all know, is the chief responsibility of the decision maker. This is why we say decision makers, policy makers, sometimes interchangeably. So this is number one in terms of leadership. Number two, in terms of leadership and international institutions, especially after 2004, we have seen EU involvement. I'd like to hear more about that, especially to earlier comments of Esra about if international institutions are more of a spoilers, veto players, what is their role? So far, at least for Cyprus, my impression, my humble impression, is that EU does more harm than good in terms of the solution, and I welcome different comments on that. And for the sake of briefly up my question, on the board, in terms of measuring security, I think security is important, we are on the same page, but replacing Ankara's guarantee for EU guarantee, can you find a more innovative and more inclusive way of measuring security? Because for Turkish Cypriots, Ankara's guarantee is their key or insurance for security. Even there are arguments saying that without Turkish peacekeepers on the island, Turkish Cypriots will be like Palestinians or so. Therefore, can there be something more inclusive way of defining security, which can be more consensus-based?
I think let's take two more questions and then I'll give you a round. Yes, Daniel?
I just got a short question to add. I'm Daniel from the British Institute. Short question to add to your point about how these other referenda are producing some unusual alignments. So like this Anel Syriza government, also this AK Party MHP alignment over this referendum, presumably is going to affect in a big way. I mean, one would assume that MHP would be the big critics of an agreement, but how does this other alignment, is that going to change the situation in a similar way to Anel's inclusion in the government in Greece?
And one more question from you.
My question will be to...
Can you please...
my name is Acar Şensoy. I'm a freelance consultant on EU projects. About the public sport you mentioned, which is very important, I think day-to-day integration of people accepting each other is also very important for creating public sport. And so, as well as a top-down process, we need a bottom-up process as well, which was, I think, lacking in Cyprus. Do you think this kind of integration, the people were ready to be integrated at the time of Anna, which I have questions really. And would you think politically, maybe starting not by a federation, but by a confederation where people get to know each other, and maybe they erase the old prejudices, old traumas in their mind, and then when the people are ready to integrate, really start a process for a federation. Do you think would that be the more innovative idea? Because it is like maybe from a civil life. If you want two people to marry each other, maybe first they get to know each other and they get to erase prejudices against each other. They kind of psychologically get ready to marry, and then they marry. I think it's a little bit parallel in this situation where still people have a lot of prejudices and enmities to each other.
I think let's have a round of replies. Yes.
Let me try to answer them all, if I can. Okay, let me start with your question about, Leo, about whether, and also related to whether do we really need a referendum for a successful outcome, and you pretty much asked the question along those lines. And Neo earlier asked whether I think that a successful peace process can be conducted without a referendum, etc. So let me clarify what I think about that. I think this very much depends on the specific case. Yes. So let's take Colombia as an example, for instance. Okay, people are shocked when people were shocked when the agreement failed in the referendum. But at that point, I was very curious about the participation percentage, the participation rate of Colombians in elections. So I looked at data, and I realized that in the past 15 or 20 years, participation rate in national elections in Colombia was never higher than 50%. So it is very naive to really, for those people who negotiate and who decide for a referendum, to think that for such a massive, nationally important issue, that there will be a higher turnout than 50%. And plus, on top of that, so even if it has passed, let's say with 51%, it was going to be a major problem in the aftermath. This is exactly what I mean by let's think about the implementation, because getting an agreement done is the easier part, perhaps, right? But what implementing is when 40% of agreements fail. Okay, that's where we need to be focusing on. Why do they fail? Why aren't they sustainable? Right? And this is also sorry, I forgot your name, but sir, this is also related to your question, right? Why do they fail? If can we have a more gradualist perhaps approach, right? So my take on that is that why do we need a referendum? First of all, let's start with that. And one of the things that we looked at in our research was the rationale for inclusion. Okay, why do these main negotiating parties want to broaden negotiations? Why do they want to do that? Okay, and there are several reasons for that. And sometimes the push for inclusion comes very top down. Sometimes it starts as a result of a more bottom-up sort of pressure approach, right? But there are several key rationales. Sometimes actually it happens because the negotiators are in a serious legitimacy crisis, okay? And they need to legitimize the negotiations. The example in South Africa that Neo gave, that the clerk needed the mandate to start the negotiations, to conduct the negotiations. So that's the point when he went to a referendum. And I think that was a very successful case in that sense in South Africa. Okay, so that's one thing. So you need the second one is. And this is most of the time to get public buy-in, right, or to receive public support to keep their for political survival, basically. Okay, when you look at, like in Egypt, for example, why did the military agree to hold a national dialogue? Well, because they were really in a lot of trouble, and they needed some sort of a negotiation process. An inclusive one, because people demanded to be there, okay, to sort of survive politically, okay. So most of the time, so I don't think we can think about negotiations outside of regular politics. We can't, okay. So this is so there is a very strong political incentive for the main negotiating parties to broaden this broaden the negotiations because they need this political. They need actually this for political survival. Okay.
Let me clarify for both speakers. Why do we need that in Cyprus? Not globally. Not why people fight or
Cyprus. Okay.
Cyprus.
All right. The third one. Let me say the third important rationale is to include the hardliners into the process. Or hardliners / spoilers, let's say, right? Because not all hardliners can be spoilers, but you may also think about spoilers. So How was Sinn Féin, how was IRA included in the negotiation process in Northern Ireland? If they were not included through this inclusive process in Northern Ireland, could we have a sustainable peace agreement in Northern Ireland, for example? Okay, so that's also another main motive, hardliner inclusion. But sometimes I think this is I don't know if this answers your question related to Cyprus, but another very frequent situation that we see is that the mediator asks for a more inclusive process, or the UN asks for a more inclusive process, and this is usually done in a very normative way, right? Because if you look at UN guidance on effective mediation today, inclusivity, local ownership are the principles, the norms that are accepted universally today, okay? But then having a normative approach may backfire, like in Yemen, okay? Because are you really including the most relevant people in the process? Or are you just including some people to get the checklist done, okay? So for Cyprus, I think this is something that the leaders need to decide. This is why I'm telling all of these, right? That do the leaders, political leaders, do they think that hardliners should be included? Okay, then maybe referendum is not the best mechanism, but they need to be thinking about something else then, right? Do they think that they actually need to increase the legitimacy of the process? I don't think this is the problem in Cyprus. The process has already have legitimacy, okay? So I don't know really. Or is this a normative requirement? It could be either required by the constitution or, you know, by international actors, etc. The international actors, I don't think they're pushing for a referendum, but this may be a legal sort of issue on the, so I don't know about that. Maybe Neo can answer that. Okay. Let's see, what else? Let me say a few more things on, all right. But to end that point, there are many examples of successful peace negotiations that were conducted, successfully implemented without a referendum. Tajikistan is an example of this, okay? Kenya is a good example. Aceh is a good example. So there are examples of this. It's not that referendums are applied everywhere, that this is a universal norm. No, it's not. Okay, there are examples of this. But from what I know of Tajikistan, for example, they did not have a referendum, but they had other inclusion mechanisms, especially it was a very successful negotiation process in terms of generating support from all regional actors, for example, Russia, Iran, etc., which was crucial. It was actually, certain groups were given an observer status, for example, in the negotiations, which was successful, etc. So there are, to cut it short, what I'm trying to say is that referendum is not the only way to gain legitimacy, to sort of mobilize legitimacy for a negotiation process. And we need to be thinking, more innovatively, creatively. So referendum may be one thing, one of the mechanisms, but what is really important is that what is needed in this specific process. Who needs to be heard? Who needs to be included? Who is suffering from exclusion? How will that affect the implementation phase, etc. This is actually what we need to be thinking about, rather than just fixating on referendum as the one only way of sort of realizing this. For I don't know actually really what the effects of other referenda will be on Cyprus. We'll all see, I guess, right? Of course, I don't know about Brexit, but I kind of have a feeling that Brexit is not going to affect it, is not going to affect it that much, the Cyprus case. I think the Turkish referendum is more likely to have an effect, of course. And partly this is because Cyprus issue is very much connected with the Turkish-EU relations, and the post-referendum era, there's a big uncertainty there. We don't know yet. So that will, that will definitely sort of, I think, affect the Cyprus negotiations. And one other, so I don't know. But I think the MHP-AKP alliance is very much an issue-based alliance or a limited alliance to this referendum. I'm not quite certain that it will continue in the future. So if especially concerning the Cyprus issue, they might actually split their ways on that. I don't know about that, but that's what I think. Just a hunch, I don't have any hard data or anything, but to answer your question about the gradualist approach and reconciliation, there are actually many peace-building, cross-border initiatives, peace-building efforts that have been taking place at the grassroots level in Cyprus. So there are those, they've been going on for a long time, and in this last negotiation process, to these sort of cross-community ties and networks, they have played a very crucial role in resolving some crises. Talking with the leaders and trying to find ways to overcome bypasses, etc. So they have been active. It's not that they don't exist. And in that sense, actually, maybe Cyprus is one of the places, because also of the size, that this these cross-community networks, peace networks, have really have been very active. For the gradualist approach, you can. So I would call it the gradualist approach, because you can name it in all sorts of different things, right? But the gradualist, where the gradualist approach can be most useful, I think, is the security issue. And I think this was advocated, this was mentioned by an op-ed that I read by Professor Ahmet Sözen a couple of weeks ago. He published it, Turkish Quarter, I can't remember where it was published, but this is the SEED group, and this is what they are also suggesting. The dilemma here is, let me tell you what they suggest first. What they suggest is that they want to turn the security issue into an incentive for the agreement to work. Okay, so for example, so that's one thing that they advocate, and they suggest that both communities can have a more gradualist approach for about troop withdrawal, for example, the withdrawal of Turkish troops. So they shouldn't be happening immediately, but it should happen in a gradual manner. So once the Turkish community sees that the agreement is working on the ground, that this actually and it should become an incentive for the Greek Cypriots to work the power sharing arrangements, and as they see this power sharing arrangement working, then a gradual withdrawal will happen. Okay, so it is in a way turning the troop presence not as something that creates insecurity, but as something that incentivizes the functioning of the power sharing arrangement. This is something that they suggest. The other actually interesting idea that they suggest is that this whole zero-sum thinking about guarantorship and the troops is sort of sidelining a very important discussion about internal security in Cyprus. So for example, again, I mean, when we think about the implementation of an agreement, you know, the areas where there will be problems, most of the time could be at the, you know, there will be internal security problems in Cyprus. Okay, there could be some radical groups may want to actually organize or you know, do attacks or things like that, or you know, we live. There's a whole different sort of regional structure that might create additional security problems inside Cyprus, etc., like human trafficking and this and that. So I think the security issue also needs to think about what really, you know, what kind of security do Cypriots need internally? So that actually will focus the discussion also on the police force. What kind of police force? And how inclusive that police force will be. Are we talking about power sharing in the police force as well? This was a huge issue in Northern Ireland, for instance, because traditionally the police force in Northern Ireland has been seen as Protestant. So the Catholics never trusted the police. They did not use the police at all, right? Or they did not call the police at all. They had their own sort of paralegal police force, right? So a really true power sharing arrangement, how police works, how efficiently police works, because a lot of things during the implementation stage will be concerning law enforcement in Cyprus. And this is a very important aspect of security, which I feel like is not really taking a lot of attention in the negotiations. So.
All right, thank you. So we have an absolute limit because at 3 Neophytos needs to go, but in any case, so please have a round of
yeah, very short, because I'm sure there are going to be more questions following this, and Esra answer most of the questions. So in terms of the legal requirements, there's no legal requirement for a referendum in Cyprus. There's an agreement with the Turkish Cypriots. Thank you very much. But there's no legal requirement. There's no law that makes referendums binding. The Greek Cypriot side, at least, as far as I know, there's an ambiguity about that. If I propose not to have a referendum, my Turkish Cypriot and Greek Cypriot colleagues would look at me as if I'm an alien. So it's already part of the conventional wisdom, it's part of the mental frame people have subscribed, and have subscribed strongly on this. And not only that, the type of referendum that we envision is exactly the same as the Annan Plan. This is ironic because we rejected the Annan Plan, but the ratification process from the Annan Plan has to stay the same, which is it's a total irony. So very difficult to change people's minds, not only on having a referendum, but also the type of referendum. That should be exactly the same as the Annan Plan.
For example, you cannot ask that you want them together or separate.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's
I mean,
like
I've been proposing that different types of referendums for the last 10 years with no success. Total failure. Yeah. So maybe we can change people's minds slowly, but maybe there is another referendum that might be another unsuccessful referendum. Maybe then we can discuss more. In terms of the UK's role with Brexit, I mean, the UK would like to sign a new trade agreement with Turkey outside the EU, would like to sign a new agreement with the European Union, with Greek, Cyprus and Turkey being veto players. I can see more limitations there in terms of what the UK can have a role in, can pressure the sides in terms of positive involvement. That sides will not find as threatening and have implications on other issues, maybe, but in terms of being more active in the, in terms of pressurizing the sides, more difficult after Brexit. The UK will be less restricted as a result of our choice. The EU question, you're right. The question was right. We have in the future, when we're having this survey, there was a discussion about the EU taking some kind of initiative. There was a kind of EU formula at the time. That's why we had a question that resonated. In the next question, we might have the UN, but more fundamental than that, we're introducing a new method based on conjoint analysis, where each side, each respondent will get a bundle of different arrangements, and then they're going to have a bundle next to it, and then they're going to choose one or the other. And this question will be repeated, and there's going to be a mathematical formula which selects the features that are more likely to be selected. So we're coming up with new ideas, and that can help also in terms of coming closer to what kind of bundle will work for the Turkish Cypriots and what kind of bundle might work for the Greek Cypriots in all issues. But this is quite fundamental in terms of showing the relative preferences in the Greek Cypriot side at that particular moment. In terms of the gradualist approach, you're absolutely right that we need more gradual, more confidence being emergent. I think one of the successful features in Cyprus is that they kept low profile. If you give them a name confederation, then it might backfire. Yeah. Have been successful in the sense that they kept low profile and have been very effective on both sides. By the term they're using is engagement without recognition, and this is a formula that we exported in other parts of the world. Been working with colleagues in Georgia on very similar arrangements there that make sides more confident. And finally, in terms of the questions of power sharing, I think another lesson that we can learn is what we call in the literature cascading power sharing. So have power sharing at different levels of government. We're thinking of power sharing as at the federal level, but we're not thinking about policing, we're not thinking about municipalities, we're not thinking about different institutions within the state. All these can provide a very important incentive for sides to sign up to the settlement.
Okay, I think if there are there any other questions? Short and sharp, please.
Yes. My name is Untitled. I work in the Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Cyprus Department, obviously. My question is, thank you both professors, by the way, for a fascinating discussion. I'm taking a lot with me aboard back. We've discussed the meeting of referenda for the settlement process, the impact or how it would legitimize the settlement process. Listening to you and to the questions we heard, it occurs to me, can we turn that question around? In 2004, we had a negotiated settlement and it was rejected by the Greek Cypriots. If now we're also at a stage where we're working towards a negotiated settlement, so the partnership hopes haven't been given up by the Turkish Cypriots and Turkey has supported them, but and our hope is obviously that we will reach a settlement. If that happens, if an agreement is reached, if we have referenda again, and if we have the same result as in 2004, if one side, the Greek Cypriot side, for example, rejects a settlement and the Turkish Cypriot side votes in favor, what would this mean for the future of the partnership? Could such a result be taken, for example, to legitimize the views that both sides should now go separate ways, that the search for a partnership should end? That would be my question.
I will imagine that this will be an argument. But it depends on, it might not, Turkish Cypriots may ask for recognition, but it's very likely that they're not going to be such eventuality. I think it's more likely that we're going to go, Turkey was much stronger in 2004. There was a lot of reaction on how the how the Greek Cypriot leadership dealt with the issue back then. If we have a referendum now, I don't see anything changing, which might be good news, because if sides, what I was trying to say to many of my Greek Cypriot colleagues is that it's better to try, even if that leads to failure, because there's a lot you can learn from having a peace process, and there's a good likelihood, based on some of the data we receive, and if the peace process involves the consultation, that might work out as well. fearing that it's going to fail shouldn't prevent us from going ahead. On the other side, if the Greek Cypriots vote against and the Turkish Cypriots vote in favor, that might create a possibility of other solutions, looking at gradualist approaches, confidence-building measures. After 2004, for instance, we have a lot of successful initiatives on both sides of the debate. Countries might improve their relationships with the Turkish Cypriots. Even if a referendum fails, I believe in terms of the normative dimensions that Leo asked me before, sides have an obligation, governments have an obligation to implement peace, stability, support their citizens. So that doesn't stop the obligations, international organizations as well, does not stop our obligations to treat people treat each other more nicely. So there should be some fundamental changes in policies if we come to that.
Esra, 1 minute.
There is a question.
If it is related, okay, yeah, sure.
It's not very related, but first I introduce myself. I'm from Middle East Technical University, and I'm a student of the Cyprus problem, let me say. My question is this. I think that the peace process itself is a means to keep the peace on the island. So keeping on trying with referendums with different ways, it might work or it might not work in the long run. My question is, what do you think of the incentives for a peace settlement? For example, hydrocarbons, which is a big issue on the island right now. Do you think that these hydrocarbons or other things, property issue, what are the roles of these incentives on the Greek Cypriot community or Turkish Cypriot community to reach for a solution? Do you think that it has a positive effect, or it is not? It doesn't have any effect or a negative effect? Because some of the interviews that we conducted as a research group on the island indicated that the hydrocarbon issue might even have a negative issue on the people because they it's not their priority and they don't want to, let's say, it's not the right wording, but sell their national values for money or hydrocarbons or things like that. So, what is your opinion on it?
Esra, would you like to have a minute
okay,
to reflect
I mean,
on both?
A minute both, yeah.
Well, I think I could approach that question from a game theoretic perspective and say that as long as it is used to integrate all parties' interests in a part of a cooperative scheme, it will work as a positive thing, as a positive incentive. But as long as it is used as is part of a competitive setup, then it will work as a negative incentive. So I think it's in the hands of the parties how they deal with it. That's what I would say. Right? I mean, does it include so for instance, does it include Turkey? Or exclude Turkey, which is a very sort of recent discussion, right? And then it can actually escalate into a conflict, right? But if it integrates all sort of parties within a cooperative scheme, then it can actually work as a de-escalatory incentive. So I think it depends how it is used.
Neil?
Yeah, that's absolutely right on both observations. It was an argument that I don't think has been made before, and we should definitely get it published. The peace process absolutely supports a peace in Cyprus, because by the virtue of expecting something positive to happen through the peace process, we have control each other's groups that would have otherwise engage in violence. Compare that to Israel-Palestine, for instance, where such a prospect is not as obvious. The fact that we have these occasional efforts to resolve the Cyprus problem, I think, has been fundamental in stability. in the island, and we move to a different mindset in the future, two-state solution. That might not necessarily be the case. Now, in terms of the energy issue, that creates a deadline for us to work, and sometimes deadlines can be constructive. So if one expects the next drilling to happen in the summer, and that is a deadline for us to work in the next 2 months. We have a momentum right now, a credible timeline to work in the next couple of months. Also, the way the recent discoveries on the Greek Cypriot, the Republic of Cyprus Economic Zone also indicate that we will need Turkey as a market. So there's a very clear win-win arrangement there. I have looked at, I'm not an expert on the topic, but I have looked some technical reports on how the natural gas could be transferred from the south to Greece and then to Italy, and they don't make any sense. They can be environmentally very threatening. They would cost quite a lot to build such infrastructures with no clear benefits, depending on the you have to make a lot of assumptions that the value of natural gas will be quite high for a long period of time. And geopolitically, they might make sense in terms of in the absence of a settlement, but there is a very close market close to you who needs that natural gas, and you can transfer it more easily there. So why not to do so? And beyond natural gas, we have tourism, we have commerce, we have all kinds of incentives to work together. So. As Esra said, it's a game theory. It's a game for both sides that we could easily win if we make the right decisions.
Yes, or from a discourse theory perspective, it's an issue of framing, actually. What is positive, what is negative, the same very thing can be both. Yeah. So, thank you very much for your participation. Thank you very much for your presentation. And it's been, I wish we had more time for discussions, but we have some time over the snack.